kitchen chaos to well-oiled machines. Get ready for newfangled technology and old-school know-how. Stories and a good bit of fun. I'm Simon, and this is Culinary Mechanic. Today, I am joined by Angelo Esposito of Wisk AI. Angelo, welcome to Culinary Mechanic.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here. I'm always on the other side, right, interviewing people, so it's nice and it's fun for me once in a while to be on the guest side and just get to share my perspective and the bit about Whisk.
Awesome. I think that's one of the reasons that I wanted to bring you on is because I've seen and heard a number of your episodes, and I really dig what you're doing, and I thought, well, it'd be fun to just bring somebody in that's doing something very similar to myself, and
Yeah,
just kind of have a conversation and perhaps get a different perspective on
yeah,
um, those things we do. So
cool.
let's just press the gas, man, and say, how'd you get close to this industry, or how'd you come to the hospitality
Yeah.
industry?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question because I wasn't the typical person in the sense of working in it and being a waiter and then a manager. Not really. Like the closest I got to fit, I mean, I actually did work a bit in a restaurant, but like I don't even consider that really a thing. But really the my upbringing was grocery stores. My dad to this day runs and operates grocery stores. So that's the closest I got to, let's say, thin margins and a tough business. So there's definitely a parallel with restaurants. But where I really got close to restaurants was a lot of friends in the industry. And so what I ended up happening is I've always had that entrepreneurship bug. Like for me, it's just like a thing. I always want to solve problems, try to create something out of nothing. So even from a young age, having friends in the industry, even prior to Whisk, I was like trying to solve problems. And some were a bit more nightlife related. One was more of a guest list management thing. And we can get into that. But long story short, it was being around people in the space, nightclubs, bars, restaurant operators, managers, and like having friends in the industry kind of got me and seeing the problems they would face was like the perfect formula because I love solving problems. My friends were all
Right.
in the industry, and that's kind of where like, Whisk began, so to speak.
Awesome. I mean, I'm a chef by trade, so for me, problem solving is everything, right? It's like, wait, I only have one oven. I normally have three. Jimmy's hungover. He's not coming to work today, and on and on and on. So
Right.
I respect that mindset of like, how do I fix this?
Yeah, yeah.
Baling wire, paper clips, and bubble gum. Those are my toolkits.
It's funny though, because
Um,
when we started, it's I always joke around because at the time when I started Whisk, I was actually working on another startup, which I thought was like a bigger problem, and it was cool. It was basically like this was maybe like 2012, 2011, but it was basically like digitizing kind of guest lists and table service. So it was more geared towards nightclubs, but it was like the idea of like, oh wow, all these nightclubs are making so much money, but they're still relying on literally pieces of paper. I wonder if we could digitize this. And it was in that, and we had some clients. It
right.
was still small at the time, but we had clients and pay, but it was in that I started getting closer to venues and restaurants and this and that. And um, I noticed a very simple problem, and it was someone counting their bar inventory with a piece of paper. And again, back to that theme, I guess I just wanted to like improve processes. And I saw this guy counting, and he was picking up the bottle and kind of, actually I got a bottle here, like literally would like, let's say, pick it up and kind of look at it and say, "Oh, it looks like a point two," and fill out this sheet. And I was like, okay, that's pretty fascinating. Like, you do this all the time? Yeah, I do this every night. And I'm like, interesting. It must just be him. And so I go to other restaurants to see. I'm like, okay, maybe it's a nightclub. They do things differently. Let me talk to like a nice high-end restaurant. Same thing. Let me go talk to this hotel restaurant. Same thing. It was basically clipboards, best case, maybe typing it into Excel. And so at the time when I started going deeper, I found like one or two solutions. So it's not like Whisk was the first. There were people prior, but I think the limitation was that they weren't easy to use. Sometimes maybe you're too ahead of your time, so to speak. And so people either tried them and then ended up going back to pen and paper Excel. So that to me was when like my eyes lit up and I'm like, I wonder, and again, I wasn't thinking about this big company. I was just like, I wonder if I can create something that's easier and more accurate, so to speak, than pen and paper Excel, but not so complex that like, people want to go back to pen and paper. And that's kind of where Whisk began, and I was joking around, a little side project at the time turned into 10 years of of business.
It's
But at the
awesome.
time, I didn't think it was going to be a company. I was just like, oh, I wonder if I can solve this problem and help out some friends, you know?
That's great. Um, so you've been doing Whisk for 10 years.
Yeah.
Um, like along the way, I think it's really important as we kind of stare into the abyss here as far as like the people listening to this podcast tend to be some fresher faces, right?
Yeah.
So I guess I would say without making this like a drudgery of what are people doing wrong, right?
Yeah.
Like what are some of the things that you're seeing as far as like inventory that people could do better? Like
Yeah.
what are the things you see?
Yeah. It's a good question. So, I'll kind of separate it into like, let's say, beverage and food, because I'll talk your language on the chef side and food, and I'll also talk on the beverage, so bar managers, etc. So, on the beverage side, really, the first thing that's just tough is it's tough to track because everything is kind of liquid. So I always joke around, but it's like if you're selling, let's say, the sweater, right, and it's like. I sold five of these in my, so I look at my point of sale. I'm like, I sold five gray sweaters, and then I count my inventory. I had 10. Now I have five. I'm like, great. I used five. I sold five. Perfect. Where things fall apart for restaurants, and I don't blame them because it's hard, is it's not one to one. It's, oh, I sold this mezcal or this tequila, but wait, the tequila is sold in shots, in singles and doubles, and the tequila soda and the margarita. The food parallel is I bought beef, but I didn't just sell beef. I sold the hamburger, I sold this, I sold that, right? Like it could mean 20 different dishes. So that's where the complication happens. And so really the first thing is just that it's a hard problem. So it's not that like the first thing I want to say is to the chefs out there, to the bar managers, like it's not your fault. It's not your fault because it's hard. It's hard. Like when I started this, I tried to do it on Excel and you can get to a certain point, and I'm sure a lot of chefs do it on Excel, and you can probably get to a certain point, but then things just start breaking. And
Yep.
if this is you, it's normal. It's normal to start on Excel and it's okay, or spreadsheets in general, but it's hard to maintain. So what I always tell people is like doing it when you're going to open your restaurant, it's better than nothing. Put your sheets in Excel, cost things out, get a rough idea of your cost. Great.
Yeah.
But it's the maintaining because once you're open, now you're receiving your Cisco, your GFS, or local supplier invoices every week. Prices are fluctuating. Your rest, that's where it's hard to maintain. So that's the first thing I would say is just the maintaining aspect. And I love to hear your perspective, being a chef. Like, how would you go about it? Let's say when you were boots on the floor, would you cost out some recipes? Would you kind of just like, I'm curious, like, what did your process look like?
Man, this, how much time do we have? But here we go. I'll tell you kind of the greater scheme in my career, and then a
Sure, sure, sure.
few like interesting highlights. So
Sure.
most of the time, it's like I work for one place, and we would reconcile down to a gnat's ass. I mean, we were building recipes, and we were all the way down, and man, like why is fryer oil? Oh, because we don't have fryer oil built into
Some
the
recipe. Yeah,
fries recipe, right? Like,
yeah,
and
yeah,
then it's like, okay, so you get all the way down that rabbit hole, and you get all the way in, and then you're like, how am I doing this? Am I doing that? All your prep recipes and
yeah,
all this stuff. And then somewhere along the way, I worked for a place where, well, I worked for one place for a very short time, and he's like, I want you to go through all of your invoices, and I want you to enter everything into a one master sheet, and then I want you to sort by the most expensive things.
yeah.
I said, okay. He goes, then I want you to take the top 50 of those, and I want you to inventory those every week. That's it. Everything else is garbage. And I was like, you're kind of crazy, but okay. And I
Yeah.
ran pretty good costs there, but I also felt like I had good habits, right?
Cool.
Um, Fast forward to a place I worked for like 6 or 7. No, I guess I worked there 9 years. I'm sorry. My last job. And we counted everything in the walk-in. We counted
Okay.
everything in dry storage, but we
Yeah.
didn't count we didn't count anything on the line, right? Because we had very specific stocking pars, right?
Okay.
And so we were fairly specific about the time that you would count it. We actually counted in the middle of the day
Okay.
on our Tuesday because we went
Interesting.
Wednesday to Tuesday. So
Okay.
Tuesday was the end of our week.
Makes
So
sense.
we really worked hard to get the chefs counting between lunch and dinner,
Yeah.
right? So everything should be stocked to about the same level, right?
That
So
makes sense.
you're talking sort of equal and equal. And
Yep.
yes, there were times that things were weird, and
True.
if things got way out of whack, you'd find yourself at dinner time on
Yeah.
Tuesday running around going, um, why do you have so much chicken fajita on the line? You know, right? And so there's been lots of different things, but and I
Yeah.
think that as I wanted to kind of get back to what you had said was if you're not certain with it, right? Like do it in Excel. And that's what
Yeah.
that's what I tell people. I was working with a client yesterday and I had set something up in Excel for them to do for their actual costing of recipes.
Yeah.
And she looks at me and she goes, "That's fine, and this is good, and we're getting some pretty good data." She goes, can you start a like a research file for us?" I said, "What do you want to research?" She goes, "I want you to research different softwares we can use to cost the recipes,
Yeah.
because
There you
here's
go.
the interesting part: they don't take inventory."
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, and I've seen
Okay?
that. I've seen that. You know what's
Yep.
interesting? I always tell people there's kind of like a pendulum, so to speak. And you kind of alluded to when you at the beginning is like you went super deep and recipe within recipe and whatever. And the truth is Whisk can do that. And it's like we have the 10% of people who want to go super deep, no problem. You can do recipe within recipe. You can create your vinaigrette, put a portion of the vinaigrette in the recipe, and then if you have a cocktail and you want to include the olives in the napkin, like you can go super detailed. But what I always tell people is like go in stages, right? So like I'll take both beverage food. On the food side, stage one, it's like, hey, let's just get your costs in. So usually when we start with clients on the food side, we'll say for now, and you kind of mentioned it with the guy who made you put all the invoices in. That's what we do. We're like, hey, use the mobile app with Whisk, scan your invoices, or if you have them on your computer, you can upload them or forward them via email. But the point is just send us all the invoices into Whisk. Whisk works its magic, processes it automatically, and then our physical Whisk team reviews it because the line items are important. Was it chicken per pound, per kilo, per this, per that? Was the case
Right.
size? So it's really important. But then we create your item database. And in the beginning, some people just do that. They just keep scanning because they track their costs. What's going up? What's going down? Okay, so they're just tracking their costs. The next like logical step after that is like, great, this is awesome. You have your items. So now, if you want, you can start counting. So they can use our mobile app, they can split up the work. Everyone could just count their inventory monthly, whatever. The next one after that, and you alluded to it, is we go to like the recipes. So we integrate the point of sale to pull the menu items, example, hamburger or whatever it is. And then because we have all those raw items, we're able to just cost it out in there. But even in that, we usually recommend, hey, before you break your head and try to map 300 recipes, just pick your top 20% of sales. So like, so we do have that mentality where it's like, yes, we can do everything and you can get there, but don't worry about perfection and having 100% map. Worry about your top sellers. If these are your top menu items and accounts for 80% of your sales. Let's put the recipes properly for those. So then the COGS for those plates or dishes are tracked. And over time, we can get fancy and do every other single recipe. So I'm with you because we have that balance. We see with
Yep.
sometimes people come in with systems, and this is why chefs are so, reluctant to use them because they want the chef to do everything. And they end up giving the chef like a lot of homework because it's like, hey, chef, can you give me these 800 recipes? Hey, chef, can you send me the last year of invoice? It's like, it's a lot of work. So we try to go the opposite route, break it up, triage it, and go like start with costing, start counting. Let's start doing some recipes. Let's do all recipes.
I don't know about you, but I did not get into the restaurant business to spend all my time in a cramped little office. I love being in the kitchen, out on the floor. And if you're nodding your head right now, I want to introduce you to an amazing company called Starfish. Look, I've gotten to know their CEO, Jordan, recently, and what they're building really impresses me. They're using AI to read your P&L, and they're going to email you actionable insights every week so you can lower your costs and increase revenue. Best part is you don't have to spend time digging through your P&Ls, poring over reports in that cramped little office. Starfish is going to do that for you so you can get back to the part of the business that you love. If you're interested, go to their website, use starfish.com. That's USE starfish.com. And tell them Simon sent you. You just kind of like rung a bell in the back of my head. I worked for a company, I would say, like about 4 or 5 years, and I was working for them at the end of an era where they had been very systemized, and then
Yeah.
like new CEO, new CEO, new CEO, and a bunch of departments got shed,
Okay.
and like a bunch of like key people that had been like database like managers and all that stuff.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
people just got like kicked, right?
Hmm.
Goodbye. And so we as chefs in that company, and there was 60 restaurants,
Oh
we
wow.
we
Okay.
relied on that for like a lot of costing information,
For
right? So that
sure.
I could then take that information and put it into a menu engineering worksheet and
Yep.
understand what my theoretical food cost was.
Exactly.
And so I didn't have that all of a sudden. Like new menu change came, right? Like a fall menu change, and I was like, "Well, where's my costing?" Like, "Oh, we don't have that. That person doesn't exist anymore. You have to do it
Oh my God.
yourself." And I looked at my regional director and I was like, "Dude,
I
like,
don't have the
what the
time.
fuck, man?
Yeah.
I don't have
Yeah.
time for this." And he
Yeah.
says, "Simon," he goes, "let's get this." He goes, "let's just throw this thing back into first gear." I said, "Okay, what do you got?" He goes, "I want you to go into your P mix, right?
Yeah.
Product mix, and I
Yeah.
want you to tell me what the 10 items that sell the best on your are." He goes, "Cost those because you're gonna
Yes.
find something magical." I said, "What's that?" He goes, especially because you're a business clientele kind of thing and people are expensing, you're going to find that most of the people that are buying, that are eating with you, are your top 10 items are going to be like 70 to 80% of your sales.
Exactly. Exactly.
You're going
Yeah.
to be stunned. And I was like, and it really taught me a lot. I was like,
Yeah.
so I don't have to do this whole thing. He goes, how
Yeah.
about this? This month, I want you to cost your top 10 sellers. He goes, and
Yeah.
across everything, whatever is bringing in the most money, cost
Yeah.
those. And then next month, I want you to go 10 more.
Yeah.
And then the next month, 10 more. And then let's see where we are. He goes, then we'll look. He goes, but what you're going to find is the la beyond the top 30 items,
Yeah.
you're going to see a massive drop. Right? Like
Yes.
now, after the top 30 items, you're now going to see that
Small impacts.
the rest is like 5% of your sales.
Yeah.
He goes,
Yeah.
and if everything else is dead on, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're
And
just
we'll do that.
killing, if you're killing it on the top 30 items,
Yeah.
the rest isn't going to matter. He goes,
Yeah.
now if you're really, really screwing everything up, then that will matter. He goes,
Yeah.
but you know, and so
That's well
that
said.
right? Like
Well,
that
yeah.
one really got me. I
Yeah.
learned a
And
lot that day.
yeah, no, it makes sense. And that's our philosophy. Our philosophy is sometimes like, and we see it because sometimes clients come to us and they use other systems and like, oh, it's been 3 months, it's been 5 months, we're still not set up. It's like, listen, you're a restaurant. You don't have the time. Labor's expensive. There's staff turnover. The last thing you want is your chef to spend 3, 4 months trying to set up this perfect system, and then he's gone. And now, good luck. You got to spend another 3, 4 months trying to set up. So our thing is, how can we give you quick wins? So we kind of like slice those wins. And the first one is like, time saved on invoice data entry plus cost. And then the second one's like, great, now let's do inventory. Great, now let's do, to your point, the top 10, because that's where I always tell people Pareto's principle pretty much always applies when
Huge.
it comes to restaurants. It's like 20% of your menu usually, I know there's exceptions, but usually will account for 80% of the sales. It's rare that you're like, oh, look at my menu. I sell all my items equally and they all account for 5%. Like that never happens. So I'm with you. Start with the top 20%. And just to segue on that, it's one of the reasons in Wisk we have this concept of partial audits, and not to make this just about the Wisk platform, but like the reason I mention is because we feel the pain of chefs and on the bar side too, and so the partial audit allows you to do an audit of a subset of items without affecting, let's say, that monthly. Because we know generally on the bar side they'll do weekly inventory, generally on the food side they'll do monthly, but the idea with the partial audits is you can say, okay, you know what? My most expensive things are, let's say, my proteins, the chicken, the beef, and the shrimp. Great. So with
Yep.
the partial audit, you can count chicken, beef, shrimp daily or 3 times a week, 5, 10 minutes, and you could keep counting that, and you'll get
Yep.
your variances of just those items. So that's a nice hack I like to tell chefs out there is it doesn't have to be this big cumbersome thing where like here's a system, these are the 20 steps you need to do, and you're only going to get value when you're at step 20. It's like, no, no, let's break it down, bite-sized things, let's give you value. And our philosophy is how do we give chefs and bar managers their time back? So we always think
Right.
about that because that's the reason we created Whisk was to give them time back to focus on the things they love. But now, if we start asking them for 800 recipes and we start asking them to review all these invoices, then we're kind of going against our main purpose, which is giving them time back. So that's why there's that balance for us of like give value, but not to the point of like, oh, I'm going to give you perfect value, but it's going to require 20 hours of your time a week.
Yeah, I mean those are great lessons, right? Like it doesn't have to be I think for that reason I'm perfectly happy to talk about the Wisk stuff because I think that what you're saying makes a lot of sense for operators across the spectrum. It's like
Yeah.
if you're getting a win, you're getting a win.
Yeah. Big
Right? And
time. Big time.
it's so common in a lot of industry, not just ours, but like
Yeah.
not just the restaurant and hotel and hospitality, but cross industry to say all or nothing. And
Yeah.
that's just not it, right? Like
That's not good.
there's
Yeah.
ways that you can be very successful. Those the folks that don't take inventory as an example, they have four restaurants and a commissary. And it blew my mind that they didn't take
Wow.
inventory. But I said, so why don't you like walk me through? Like, this is
Yeah.
just a great idea, like to understand. So walk me through
Yeah.
what your rationale is.
Yeah.
She looks at me and she says, well, our food cost is about 24% across all of our restaurants. She says, if I take it, add them all up into one sheet, they're 24%. If I break them out, I got a 23.8, I got a 24.1. She goes, so we look at 6 weeks rolling, and
Hmm.
if someone is off of that norm, off of if they're either high or low, then we kind of dig in on the exception. And I was like, gosh, look at you, right?
Yeah.
You're doing some fairly high level mathematics there in a very small. There's some statistical stuff there. There's some
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
cool, almost actuarial if you really think about it. But anyway, it's interesting, but you can do it, right? But
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
what I like to tell people is I don't care what you do. Really, I don't. Like if you want to inventory everything and you want to like understand fryer oil and French fries and tostadas, great. If you want to take no inventory, whatever you do, just do that like well.
Mhm. Yeah.
You know?
Look, going back to your question of like, what are some of the biggest mistakes is number one, I think sometimes people, because there's so many options out there for software, this, that, sometimes people, the two most common mistakes, sometimes people get distracted and choose a software based on something that doesn't really matter. So if I always tell you, focus on what your biggest problem is. So if you're a bar manager and you're like, I know I'm losing a lot of money, industry average 20% from overpouring spillage theft, and you're like, listen, I have high volume. If I can recapture some of this, I know I'm losing $1,000 a month. If that's the pain point, look for the system that will help. Don't get distracted with, oh, but this other system also does food and they do. It's like, no, no, no. Find the system that can do the alcohol well, that maybe has a database, that can barcode scan, that's precise, like that integrates with your POS. Right. If you're on the food side, you might say like, okay, my biggest problem is I know there's 30% food waste, give or take, and I really want to get my ordering under control. My staff is over ordering. Okay, well, let's find a tool that can really help you inventory and set par levels and
Right.
track your purchases to recommend what to order. So like that's number one is really focus on the main one, two, or three problems you're having, and then base the tool. The second biggest mistake I always see is owners, especially when it's a bigger group or management, let's say, make the decision without implicating, let's say, the chef or the bar manager. I think it's super important to get people's opinion that are gonna be using it. Because what ends up happening is you have the leadership, so to speak, that makes a decision. We're gonna use this system. Now the chef, right? You come along, you're like, this system sucks, and it's like super clunky and it's hard to use, and it's like it looks like just a database of info, and you're like, man, this sucks. And then you want to go back to Excel, and I don't blame you. So our thing is we want the buy-in of the chef or of the bar manager, etc.
Right.
Because we're like, listen, if you're not going to use it, it's what's the point? And so that's the second mistake I see is ownership chooses a system, staff doesn't like it or doesn't use it well because it's very clunky, and then you're back to square one where you're not getting the data you need to make good decisions. So that's probably the second most common thing that I see, and that's why I always recommend to people, especially in our space of inventory, restaurant and bar inventory, is book demos and have the staff that's going to use it involved because on
Right.
paper, and you'll see this on paper, we're all the same on paper. Meaning, like, what's the difference between Whisk and competitor A, B, C, D on paper? Nothing. If you just look at do you do inventory? Yes. Can I enter my invoices? Yeah. Can I compare it with my sales? Yes. And can I manage my recipes? Yes. Most inventory managers will do that. Now the question is how. So I always tell people the big question is the how. And if you can drill down into that, you can make a really, really good decision. And it's the difference between saying, ah, no, I hated my system. I went back to Excel, systems suck, whatever, or being like, wow, this system's working for me. It's saving me time, it's saving me money, and my chef's actually happy, not resistant to it. And that's the idea behind it is like empowering these people, whether it's a
Right.
chef or a bar manager, not forcing something kind of down their throat, say, use this piece of tech.
Yeah. I mean, what you said right there, that is like the core tenets of like good change management, right?
Right, right, right.
Like you got to get buy-in. If you don't have
Yeah.
buy-in, like, um, when I was a chef, I always try to be very people centric, right? Like I'm an extrovert and I like to talk to people. So
Yeah.
for me, it was like, okay, I have a food cost problem, right?
Hmm.
So I would gather my guys and gals around and go, look, we're high on food costs. Well, how high is it? And when I first started doing that, like they were like, so what does that mean? What does that mean to me? And I'd be like, oh, okay. Like every time you cut the onion too far away from the core and you throw away that much,
Yeah.
you're
You're
wasting
contributing.
a
Yeah.
penny. And
Yeah.
well, that doesn't matter. I'm like, do it 1,000 times. What do you
Yeah.
get? Oh, it's
Yeah.
$10. Yes. Right. And like, so as time went by, I then would go and go, hey man, we got a food cost problem, and the main category is meat. So
Yeah.
I'd go to my lead cook on the line at night, and I'd go to his right hand man, the grill guy, and I'd go, guys, we're fucking something up. I don't know
Yeah.
what it is yet, but we're fucking something up because we
Yeah.
buy portioned meat, right? We
Yeah.
buy vac pack portioned steaks, and we slice prime rib. So you need to really pay attention to what you're doing. Do you need a new scale? Do you want a second scale? Um, that particular grill guy said to me, this is part of a company, and we required them to temp their their steaks before they sold them, right? So not super sexy little tiny boutique, but big
All right.
jamming 350 seat restaurant that doubled as a steakhouse most of the time.
Wow.
And I said, "What do you need?" And the guy goes, "Can I have more thermometers?" I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "I have two thermometers, and most cooks only get one." He goes, "But if I can have five, I can temp my steaks better and never lose anything." I was like, "Here."
Yeah. Why didn't he say so? Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
So like buy-in, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. And the reason buy-in is so important, especially when it comes to these tech tools, is the generally leadership won't ask the detailed questions that matter, right? And so that's why they might look at Wisk, a competitor ABC, and at a surface level, they might just think just price. Like, oh wait, this one's like $50 less a month. Okay, this makes sense. Hey guys, here, use this. But when I meet with a chef, or when our team meets with a chef, or if we meet with a bar manager, I'll sit down with a chef and I'll ask them, tell me what's the most problematic thing, and I'll talk to them naturally. I'll be like, I imagine you could probably build a basic Excel sheet, put your costs. Yeah, I could do that. What about maintaining? Is that a pain? Every time you get invoices, you get a couple different invoices. Yeah, that's a pain. Let me ask you, when you get olive oil from supplier ABC, what do you do? Because now your recipe is linked to like olive oil, but maybe you received it from a few other suppliers. Yeah, I guess I got to go in and change it, and then okay, let me show you how Wisk can handle that. Let me show you how. And so I can go specific, and the chefs go specific, especially if they use other systems because they've hit pain points that leadership might not know. They'd be like, ah, this other system, I couldn't count in this place because there was no Wi-Fi connection. Okay, let me tell you how our app works offline. Or I couldn't do this
Right.
because only one person can count at a time. Okay, let me tell you how you can add users and everything syncs. So the chefs and bar managers will ask specific things that leadership are looking a bit more high level. So they'll be like, can I get my food costs? Okay, great. And it integrates with my point of sale. Okay, cool. Let's start. And that's where that disconnect happens, and then it's a mess. So all it's to say, get the buy-in is a big one. Do your research. It's worth your time to spend 30 minutes with one or two extra companies and see a demo and ask the right questions and then implement, then just jump on the first one you see, implement it, and then waste 3 months. So that's the second piece. And the third piece, when it comes to food costs, I always tell people it's like there's a bit of a business sense behind it, right? It's not just I look at this plate, how can I make this cheaper? Let me use less portions, let me use a cheaper quality meat. Of course, that's not the answer, and that's not what Whisk does. It's not just making everything cheaper. It's to your point. It's number one, looking at the top 10, top 20, whatever, and then setting it so you can set cost alerts. And if it surpasses that cost alert because it's linked to the invoices and the beef has gone up or this has gone up and it triggers a certain cost. Let's say with your hamburger, you're happy with 25% cost, 30% cost, and now it triggers past 30, you get notified. But you could take an action. The action could be like, hey, let's slightly increase the selling price. Hey, that is weird. Let me see if I can find another beef supplier. Hey, should we change the portion or not? But there's also sometimes just the logical side of, wait, maybe I'm okay with a higher cost percentage if I'm just making more dollars. And there's a saying of like, you don't count percentages in the bank, you count dollars. And the idea
Yep.
behind that is sometimes it does make sense. You go to a high-end restaurant, a bottle of wine might be a 50% cost because it's the $300 bottle of wine or maybe less, but let's say $300 bottle of wine, you might be able to sell it for 500. Whereas if it's a $50 bottle of wine or 20, you can make the markup a much higher. So the idea is percentage wise, you might be happy with that cheap bottle of wine, but dollar wise, you made $200 on that expensive. So it's not just percentages, but what I like to tell people is it gives that big picture, actual versus theoretical, shows you kind of like how good are you doing in a perfect world versus what you're actually doing. And then it's a matter of drilling down and seeing like the individual kind of plates and where there's room for optimization. And then the third place I like to look at is the ordering. Because on beverage, it's bad, but it's not as bad because it gets this can sit on my shelf, right? This bottle.
Right.
Food can't sit on your shelf for that long. I mean, dry storage can, but like, you know what I mean? Like produce and proteins can't sit on your shelf. So personally, where I see the biggest wins on the food side, I see it's time for just the manual cost tracking and all that, and then the
Right.
order optimization. On the beverage side, I see it with the accuracy of inventory and using Bluetooth scales that we have to then get precise down to the ounce measurements to actually understand where they're losing money. So it's similar in both sides. It's just the way we approach it slightly different.
Yeah. I love it. I think that I will tell you it's rare to hear people talk about using their solution in
Yeah.
increments.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I applaud you for that right off the
Yeah.
bat.
We do
Um,
it because we've been on the ground, and the truth is like we've lived it. So although, like I said at the beginning, I wasn't a waiter for years, and then yeah, what manager? So no, but I've personally done hundreds, if not higher, number of maybe thousands of inventories and setups, and so I felt the pain because before I started Whisk, I wanted to really understand things. So I did it on pen and paper. I did it on Excel. I've downloaded other systems. I don't want to name to name, but that's why I'm so confident I could tell you why the system where it's going to fail, where it's going to fail. So that's why when we speak to clients, and my team knows as well, when we speak to clients, we can speak their language because we've been there. And so the nice thing about Whisk is we have a really quick feedback loop. So everything we built wasn't my idea, wasn't my, co-founder's idea. It was like we were on the ground and we're like at a hotel and we're in a basement and then we're counting their wine stock room in a five-star hotel and there was no Wi-Fi. We're like, damn. So we wrote it down by hand and we entered it later. But that inspired the offline mode. The real-time sync. We're at a massive club in Las Vegas. One of our clients, they wanted to count with like 10 people at the same time, all in different areas. Like, holy
oh
shit.
wow.
We now have, I mean, it's been years, but we now have a real-time sync mode. So as I'm counting, everything's being synced. So all this to say, a lot of these things, it wasn't that Angelo sat down and I was like, this will be a genius idea. It was really just being there, seeing pain points happening in real time with these people doing it. And then that's where a lot, or I would say the majority of these kind of ideas from West came from, was just really being on the ground. And so when I speak to the way I'm speaking to you right now about chefs and about triaging and starting with this, it's not because I was a genius and I thought it, it's just because I've lived it. I've dealt with chefs. I know how busy they are. And now it's like we've take time, but after the feedback, now we got to the point where it's like, okay, we can somewhat speak their language and say, okay, let's start with this and grow into this and grow into that. Let's go into bite-sized things. Let's not jump into this and make this overwhelming because we've dealt with enough chefs to understand they got a lot going on, right?
Yeah. I love it. Have you ever heard the story of the guys who built toast in the beginning? They were like coding, they were sitting in a dining room, like
Okay.
dealing with the things like as they were launching like their first restaurant and like they were having problems and like both of the founders were like sitting on their computers like coding solutions like in the middle of dinner service, right?
Wow.
Like to because oh this is happening and that's happening and like you said
That's crazy. Yeah.
an offline
Yeah.
mode and a this and a that and it's like
Yeah.
huh.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
guys who
That's
started
cool.
it were just grinding.
Yeah, yeah, and we did that for the first few years. We were like on the ground, and now the nice thing I have to say, because being toast, that's very stressful because it's like core because you're punching in and collecting money. Inventory is more back of house. So like, yes, there were times that people got upset, like early days. I'm talking about like literally first year of business. I remember, I'll give you a quick one. We were at a bar and it was a really cool setup because it was a resto bar, but the alcohol was all on their back bar. It was one of those places where their stock room was small because like it was more visually like it was part of their design. So they had many
Right.
shelves and it's like, so when we were counting, I was with the owner helping him count the shelves. We're maybe 70% of the way through. Um, his phone dies. And he looks at me, he's like, oh, my phone died. And in my head, I'm just like, I look at my co-founder, Chip, and I'm just like, and he was there programming because we're like a very small team in the early days, like just two, three people. And I'm just like, what happens if it dies? And at that time, if it dies, you lose you lose everything. So
Oh
that was the
no.
inspiration for the real-time sync. And that's why today, fast forward many, many years, if the last thing I counted, I don't know, tomatoes, whatever, if I drop my phone and it breaks, it's okay. It was synced. So that was a hard lesson, but it's hitting a lot of those lessons, being there on the ground. The only nice thing, unlike, your story about Toast, was because it wasn't so centric to like, I need to collect this money from this client, you had a bit of breathing room, but still you had times like that where it was tough. Like, how am I going to tell this owner the last 2 hours we spent counting his back bar are done? Like things like that. Tough conversations for sure.
Yeah, I've had the phone, I've had the thing like where it just didn't save. And I was like, I just spent 3 hours counting
Yeah.
inventory.
That's that's
Yeah.
hard. That's a very hard conversation as like as a company. That's why like for us that was a really fundamental thing that we did. We're like it has to be real time. Like it has to sync. So like the last thing someone did if their phone breaks, if they phone died, like it at least it's saved and that's where the offline mode and the real time sync came in. But these are some of the details I always say. So like when we go back to the beginning of convo and we talk about like the idea of really taking on these demos. And one of the biggest mistakes I see, this is what I mean, because leadership might not ask, like, is it a real-time sync? Like, they might not go into the details. They might not say, like, does it work in areas with weak Wi-Fi? They might not be thinking, but the chef might be like, listen, the last time I had was a pain in the ass because I was in the fridge and I couldn't count because there was no connection.
Yep.
Like, speak, and
Yep.
I get it. Let me show you how we can
That's
solve it.
real.
That's real, right? And so that's the difference. And to go back, that's why I always say like that's one of the biggest mistakes is leadership makes a decision, people using it don't like it. So if you can bridge that gap and just actually get those people involved in the decision making, it's a world of a difference. And to be honest, we love it because we do well there because generally people using it like it. Generally, you can't please everyone, but I would say the majority of the people using Whisk like it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the things we talked about today were just really about like you whatever you're using, make sure it works for you, right? If
Yep.
that's Excel spreadsheets, then do that. I
Yep.
think for me
Yep.
that's like crawling. And then
Yeah.
once you get everybody gets to a proficiency point, and nowadays there's choices whether it's Whisk or anybody
Exactly.
else. It's like
Exactly.
when it's time to run, like there's
Yeah.
plenty of options, and people get tired of crawling at some point,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
And
Um,
it's funny when you said that it's actually something we've adopted in terms of like the way we sell. And what do I mean by that? We actually try not to sell into places that don't do anything. And what we've learned, and this is an interesting one, but what we've learned is like, let's say, your friend that doesn't do inventory. I wouldn't really pursue that person or like as a business. Why? Because it's an uphill battle. Because the person, let's say you were a chef at that restaurant, you're not doing inventory. Now someone introduces Whisk, you're going to resent it because you had 0 hours of work counting. And now, even if Whisk is the coolest system and offline and blah, 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 you now have work, right? And so it goes from no work to work and you resent it. And so what we learned, at least for us, is as long as the chef or on the beverage side, the bar manager is doing something, and that could very well be Excel. To be honest, the majority of time is Excel. The competitor stuff is actually the minority. It's like maybe 20% of the time. Usually 80% of the time, they're on Excel. That's cool because then we're like, great, you're already like now we could speak the same language. So like, hey, you know how
you're
you were
walking.
updating that in Excel? Let me show you how you could just snap a picture. And then they're like, oh, that's amazing. And hey, you know how like that recipe's not up to date because you ordered olive oil this week from that different supplier? Well, in Whisk, let me show you why you don't have to update it because it can actually understand. Oh, this is amazing. So we love people that are doing it, whether it's on paper and Excel, because it's like the walking to your point, the crawling to walking, beautiful. The not doing anything to walking is an uphill battle. And so like we are very weary of people that want to try whisk but are not doing anything because we know it's kind of an uphill battle.
And it goes back to buy-in, right?
Big time
Well, awesome.
buy-in and
I got one
yeah.
last question for you.
You tell me.
What is a win in your day? Because I think that for me, winning my day is kind of the goal on an everyday basis. So,
Yeah,
what's a win in your day?
that's a good question. Man, honestly, like the last few years, I've really kind of shifted my life into just kind of just having more of a grateful attitude, like just really being like whether things are good or bad, on paper, like just like really being grateful. So generally, like not to be cheesy, but like every day generally is a pretty good day. But I mean, if I think more of like the business side, for me, what I like to do is at least have one win. And when I say a win for me on the business side, because a win, could be more than that. It's like, hey, my dad's out of the hospital. Like, right, like there's just life happens, and like there's so many not good things that can happen. But in terms of like more the business side, there's many meetings I have and this and that and podcasts or whatever. But for me, the win is when I can move the needle. So like I try to do like one impactful decision, so to speak,
Nice.
on a daily basis. So for me, that's what gets me like at least like, okay, this was a win because the thing I've learned, and it took me like 10 years to learn this, and it's going to sound obvious to people in business now, but um, work will never end. So when you realize it's like it's not like a mountain where you're like, oh, I just want to hit the summit. Like you realize like it doesn't matter. Take any scenario. It's like, is Amazon stopping to grow? Like no. Is Apple like, all right, we're done. We're $1 trillion. Like we're good. Like no. They're coming out with new iPhones and new pro like so when you realize it's a never-ending thing, Google, Apple, even the biggest companies are still growing and figuring things out. Then you realize, wait, okay, let me get that mentality out of my head of like, I just got to get to this peak because there's no peak. So once you shift that, then it just becomes like more of a steady race, more of a marathon and not a sprint. And you just want to hit like these kind of wins. So going back to the main question, for me, like a good win is like just making one impactful decision on a daily basis. I mean,
Awesome.
that's hard sometimes. Let's call it 3 times a week, but for me, that's a win.
That's awesome. I like it. And for the record, like I can't tell you how many people I've had to tell in my career that life is a marathon, not a sprint, right?
Yeah.
And I was told that 1,000 times in my 30s.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I feel you, and I think that it takes time to like you can know that and you can hear that,
Yeah.
but until you feel it, right?
Yes, you gotta feel it. Yeah. Yeah.
Until you feel it that like it's I used to ride bicycles a lot, and so I
Okay.
remember living in New Mexico, and I remember on this one ride it was like you get to the top, oh, we're at the top, turn around, it's a switchback, fuck my life. And then you go and you get to the top and it's a switchback. And so now I've
Oh
come to
my God.
understand that there's fast and there's slow, and
Yeah.
sometimes they're the same and sometimes they're
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
But it's just gonna keep you like you said, it's just gonna keep going.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
Never ends. So you might as well try to.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Angela, what a great conversation. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
That's fun, man.
Um,
Thank you.
in the show notes, I'm going to make sure that people can find both Whisk and you. And to all you out there, thank you for playing in our sandbox today and joining the hopefully you enjoyed the conversation. Um,
This is fun.
as well for you out there, please leave a review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify because it seems to be building up a little bit of momentum right now. Every week that I look at the number, it gets a little bigger, so life is good.
Nice. Nice.
So have a great one and catch you on the other side.
Thank you for having me. It was a blast.